Today is October 10th, and we're having Alex Krainer with us to talk about the conflicts in the Middle East and in Ukraine. Welcome back, Alex.
Thank you. Always good to be back with you, Nima.
And let's start, Alex, with the situation right now in the Middle East and what's going on between Israel and Iran. How do you find, before going to the discussion of what's going on in the Middle East, how do you find the current state of Israeli economy vis-a-vis what's going on with these conflicts in the Middle East?
Well, Israeli economy has suffered tremendously since the beginning of this war about 1 year ago. Well, since the beginning of their action against Gaza a year ago. I think that they lost something like 20% of their GDP and are expected to lose another 12% next year. They've lost some major investors, like the Intel Corporation was planning a large chip factory in Israel. They indefinitely canceled that project, which was extremely important to Israel. Their ports are virtually closed and bankrupt. The tourism is dead and finished, maybe for good. And so the situation is disastrous. I think that this is also translating into Israel's inability to adequately arm and equip their troops, because we are getting rumors from Israel that the troops the soldiers are reporting that they are running out of ammunition, that they're short. And so all of these things are, it's a contrast to what the Israeli policymakers are saying, but it's obvious that they will not give away these kinds of information. They will try to make themselves look bulletproof. They will exploit any success that they have, as they had with the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, to give the impression that they have superpowers, that they can do anything they want, whenever they want, at a flick of a switch. And I see that a good deal of the public, particularly in the United States, are very eager to believe all this. They just convince themselves that Israel can take out this and take out that and kill this person and that person and destroy whatever they choose to destroy. It's not quite like that. And I think that the house of cards is slowly starting to implode. And I wrote last week in one of my reports that I think that Iran's last missile attack on Israel may have stopped the march to war. Obviously, Netanyahu and his cabinet cannot say this out in the open, but it was a very, very significant development, because it showed that Iran has the capability of striking Israel accurately. It showed that Israel's air defenses are not impenetrable. It also shown that Iran's missiles are advanced and that they are reasonably accurate, meaning they can strike targets that they want. And so they chose to strike military targets. And they gave several hours advance to the Americans, who indubitably warned the Israelis. So the whole incident had zero casualties, except for one unfortunate Palestinian guy who just happened to be where part of an Iranian missile fell to the ground. But that implies that Iran can strike at critical infrastructure targets in Israel, What if they take out their power plants? What if they take out their communications infrastructures? This is a very, very vulnerable position to be in. And Israel doesn't, unlike these people who are ready to believe that Israel has superpowers and is bulletproof, there are no easy answers to any of these problems. In fact, there are no answers, period. So if Israel had a rational government at its helm, they would be talking peace about now. They would say, okay, we lost this one. We have been strategically defeated and we have to make peace, whatever the price. And then, you cut your losses and you go back to rebuilding your economy and your society. As it is, they're going for broke. They are, busily discussing with Americans what to do and how to proceed. They even brought out the son of the late Iranian king, Reza Pahlavi, to give these eloquent speeches about the true democracy that he's going to bring to Iran when he's installed there by by a military intervention by Iran's enemies. Wonderful, and so the result of all this could be the total destruction of Israel in the near future. And let's remember that in 2012, none other than Henry Kissinger said that 10 years from now, there will be no more Israel at all. And so, Kissinger's timeline would have predicted that Israel would cease to exist in 2022. He got the timeline a bit wrong, but he did know a little bit of something about the political and geopolitical dynamics of the region to lead him to the conclusion that in 10 years from then, Israel would no longer exist. And I think that the scenarios that he predicted are now coming to pass.
The question is, Alex, right now, they started the conflict in Gaza. It seems that they responded, but right now with Lebanon, and it seems that on the ground, as we talk with other analysts, military analysts, they're thinking that the Israeli forces are not capable of fighting on the ground against Hezbollah. That is so much powerful on the ground because they have so much experience in Syria, in Iraq. They have been fighting on the ground with ISIS, with Daesh, with all of these radical Islamists. And right now, they want to fight them on the ground. Do you think that they're going to be capable of making a buffer zone at the southern part of Lebanon?
I very much doubt that. What most people don't seem to understand is that the Israeli military themselves have, so a few years ago, I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was relatively recent, 6 Israeli think tanks have conducted a very thorough study. They interviewed more than 100 former and serving Israeli military generals and security experts, some of whom have fought in Lebanon and have engaged against Hezbollah, to analyze Israel's prospects in a military clash with Hezbollah. And this was before October 7 last year. So, they didn't even take into account that the Israeli military would be significantly stretched in Gaza and weakened by a prolonged fighting there. And their conclusion was that this would be suicidal mission. The title of their report, which was about 130 pages, and it was presented to the Israeli cabinet, the title was "The Most Deadly War of All." So their conclusion was that Israel engaging against Hezbollah would be absolutely suicidal. Now the circumstances since then have changed, not in Israel's favor, but against Israel. Israel is much, much weaker now. And so I don't see how they could prevail against Hezbollah on Hezbollah's terrain in a fight for which Hezbollah has been preparing for many years now, since 2006, for which it has built extensive infrastructure, underground facilities, absolutely massive arsenal of short-range and long-range missiles, counting anything between 100 and 150,000 missiles. This report said that Hezbollah would be able to fire between 2,500 and 3,000 missiles a day against Israel, against Israeli targets. So we haven't seen any of that yet, but I think that the likelihood that Israel can magically overcome this while they're also being attacked in the south, while their economy has been severely weakened, I think it's magical thinking.
And so it's so much amazing when you look at the way that the mainstream media is picturing the conflict in the Middle East. With, as you mentioned, with the latest attack, Iranian missile attack on Israel, when you look at the mainstream media, you see that they failed, Iranian were humiliated, and they couldn't do anything, and they couldn't hit the targets, they achieved nothing. And it reminds me the same way that they were reporting on the conflict in Ukraine when this conflict started. They were giving false hopes to Ukrainians that they're capable of fighting this. Right now, it seems that they're doing the same false hope to Israelis. I'm not talking to the elites, because elites know what's going on, to the people, to ordinary people, to the public opinion. And at the end of the day, do you think that they're doing a favor for Israel, or they're doing the same thing that they did to Ukraine?
Well, mainstream media are psyops, pure and simple, and there's a reason for these kinds of psyops to accompany military engagements. You want to give the enemy's impressions that you're very, very strong, that you're invincible, in order to sap their fighting morale. Because if they think that you're finished, that you're about to fall, they might get extra motivation to fight you, to attack, and to finish you off. So, given that Israel is in an existential agony practically, they obviously have to do what's equivalent of trash talk. When you look at those mixed martial art fight, then these fighters before the fight, they do a lot of trash talk to pump themselves up and to try to intimidate their opponent and so on. So this is being done. I think, are they doing themselves a favor? They could, if they were able to prevail in a short time. Because another thing that came from the military circles in Israel, that they can prevail in a short engagements. They believe that they can win in short engagements, but that the prolonged engagement would be very, very destructive and dangerous for them. And now, their fight against Hezbollah, with Hamas, which was supposed to be finished in about 2-3 weeks' time, now it's gone on for over a year, and they're nowhere near to vanquishing Hamas. And so, in those circumstances, if you want to prevail quickly, then you might successfully rely on psyops. And I think that maybe their attack with the walkie-talkies and the pagers was intended also as a psyop, to disorient and demoralize your enemy before you were going to attack. But I think they got it all wrong. The timing wasn't right. If they were going to invade Lebanon, it should have taken place immediately after those attacks rather than several weeks later. And so it's obvious that the Israelis themselves they've lost their confidence. They're clearly not, how do you call it? They're not being decisive. We saw that the promised retaliation against Iran still hasn't happened, even though they said it'll be hard, it will be big, and it will be almost immediate. No, they still haven't done anything. So I think that all of that indicates that they're losing their confidence, and in those circumstances, I think that the trash talk, these mainstream media psyops, then become counterproductive, because then people ask themselves, well, all this chest thumping and then nothing. Maybe you're lying about everything. Maybe you're finished. And I think that this is the impression that they're giving to everybody now, and especially to the Israelis in Israel, because we see more and more of them either leaving or they already left Israel, those who could. We see that the troops are unwilling to fight. We see that a large majority of Israelis want a ceasefire. They want a ceasefire not necessarily because they want to make peace, but they think that this is a better way to get their hostages back. And we see that that whole society push to prevail in a military conflict is simply dissipating, is disintegrating. And so once that's gone, it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to put it back together.
And when we look at the main objectives of the Israeli government, the first one was about the hostages in the hand of Hamas. They couldn't bring them back home. And do you think that the conflict with Hezbollah in Lebanon would help that objective, would help to bring the hostages back? Or it doesn't have anything to do with that?
My impression is that it has nothing to do with that. I think that their hope of bringing hostages back would have been to actually make peace. And we know that just before he died, Hassan Nasrallah agreed to a ceasefire with the Israelis, with the Israeli government. And the Hamas had their own objectives. They wanted to exchange those hostages for the hostages that Israel keeps in their prison system, where they're being tortured as we're speaking now. And so if they wanted to bring their hostages back, they had a way to do it without all the killing. And that would also stop the blockade of their ports, and it would enable rekindling of their economic growth. So a lot of things could have been done in a constructive way. The problem is that we have a man at helm who might end up very likely in prison if he loses power, and we have a government who have this fanatical messianic agenda that they're pursuing, and it seems that nothing will detract them from that, and that they think even that they don't need anybody. They don't need Germany as an arms exporters. They don't need NATO. They don't need the Americans. They don't need anything. They will prevail and win this all on their own because, I don't know, I guess because God is on their side, but I think that they're pushing the country to a collective suicide.
Yeah. And the second objective, Alex, was to send their people to the northern part of Israel. And we can say that it's directly connected to what's going on with Lebanon. But even pushing Lebanese to the Litani River, and even with that concept, they're capable of hitting the northern part of Israel. They don't have any shortage in terms of reaching to the northern part of Israel using missiles, rockets, and so forth and so on. Do you think that how they can convince themselves that this policy would work for their people to be sent to the northern part of Israel?
That's a very good question. And I think that the answer to that is purely in human psychology. And I think that the Israeli leadership has succumbed to a delusional groupthink. I think that it's quite obvious to anybody who's paying attention that they are in an impossible situation. Of course, Hezbollah's missiles can hit anywhere in northern Israel, and they do. I think, wasn't it just yesterday that they attacked, or day before that they attacked the port city of Haifa with over 100 missiles, and many of them have landed and hit their targets. We saw that the Houthis from Yemen could launch an accurate missile over a distance of 2,000 kilometers and hit their target and not even be seen by the American and Allied ships in the Red Sea or by the Israeli air defense forces. And what does that tell you? And we don't even know. We know that some of this technology the Houthis got from Iran, which implies that maybe that Hezbollah has similar technology, which would imply that they can hit anywhere in Israel, not just the north of Israel. Another thing that is important to point out is that Houthis have demonstrated that they have a very sophisticated way of tracking the naval traffic, and that they're capable of accurately striking at ships sailing through not only the Red Sea, but also East Mediterranean, and they can strike them and hit them. Well, that means that they can strike and hit many other targets as well. This all amounts to a strategic defeat. And at that point, I think that a normal, responsible, constructive government sits down and negotiates peace. But we are not dealing with a normal, constructive government. So, I think that's the best answer to your question that I can give you. They're not normal, they're not rational, they're not constructive, and they're completely in the grips of some kind of a delusional groupthink that prevents them from reaching very obvious conclusions and making decisions which would minimize the damage to Israel and to the Israeli society and salvage what can be salvaged.
Yeah. In your opinion, why is the Biden administration trying to do, in my opinion, its best to avoid the conflict between Iran and Israel? And do you think it's related to the timeline of this conflict? It's related to the capabilities of Israel to being in that such a conflict with Iran? What are the main reason in the mind of the Biden administration?
I think there are several important reasons, and they are related also to the lively debate, some of which has been on your channel, whether the tail is wagging the dog or the dog is wagging the tail, between Israel and the United States. I think that's a very important question, and I have to say that in a way that's not obvious and it's not exactly the same. I agree more with Noam Chomsky than I do with John Mersheimer. I know that Hassan Nasrallah also was the same opinion. We have many statements on the record by American military personnel who, talked about Israel as being their unsinkable aircraft carrier in the region. We also have a very recent statement by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. saying that if we lose Israel, we're going to lose control over the region's energy resources, and this would be terrible for our national security. So, that thinking stretches throughout the timeline that involves the whole creation of Israel, not just from 1948, but from 1917, from the Balfour Declaration. You had the thinking in this round table, the Milner's kindergarten, where they they stated well before Israel was ever created that they would need to populate the region with a particularly patriotic kind of people there. And obviously, what they had in mind was patriotic Jews committed to a national homeland for the Jews. But it was, I think that from the beginning, it was cynical manipulation. And so now, I think that the American leadership now is very keenly aware of the possibility that they might lose this unsinkable aircraft carrier. I think the second reason is that also the American military power is on the wane. That even in the early 90s, when they were, in their unipolar moment and when their military power was undisputed, internal reports from the US military was very clear and categorical that their hegemony in the Middle East depended on two main things. One was the projection of power, okay? So let's say discouraging anybody to challenge their hegemony. And two is reliance on allies, which, at the time included Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Israel predominantly. But I think that much has changed. The military predominance is no longer remotely true, and their allies are no longer allies. The Saudis are no longer committed to being the unquestioning U.S. ally in the region. Israel is imploding on itself, and I think that Jordan itself also is on the verge of potentially a revolution and a regime change against the king Abdullah. And the third reason also is economic. So, if there was a full-scale war between Iran and Israel, I think that in a very short time you might see crude oil trading at $150 or $200 a barrel, or who knows, maybe more. And I think that would be absolutely devastating to the economy of the United States and of all other Western allies like Britain and Europe and Japan, because it would trigger commodity price inflation. So, potentially extremely destabilizing developments at home. And so I think that at least until election time, the United States wants to play this very, very carefully. It's not that they don't want that war. It's not that they don't want a regime change in Iran. They do. They very much do. And they would go to extreme lengths to gain control of Iranian oil resources. Iran is also a pivot point of Chinese Belt and Road system security architecture in the region. So China and Russia have designated Iran as the linchpin of the regional security in Western Asia. And so for the United States and for NATO, regime changing Iran would be a Christmas gift. It's just that they cannot do it, and the risks are extreme. And let's say that between now and the elections on 6 November this year, I think that they will try to make sure not to rock the boat too much.
And you talk about regime change in Iran, and recently Lindsey Graham was talking about how he is planning, or in his mind is planning, to do regime change in Iran. And he says that it cannot be achieved through the military operation. We have to isolate Iran to do the regime change in Iran. But the question is how isolated you can do, because Iran is right now, in terms of in the eyes of the Westerners, talking about the United States and the European Union, Iran is isolated. Iran doesn't have that much of ties with the United States or the European Union. And what else they can do to isolate Iran?
I don't think they can do a whole lot. I mean, Iran is isolated from the, international community, which consists of the United States and their vassal powers in Europe and Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and so forth. But as far as all the rest of the world is concerned, Iran is anything but isolated. Iran's economic and political and diplomatic and cultural ties with the rest of the world, with China, with Russia, with the powers in the region, including Saudi Arabia, are only getting stronger and more solid. And as we've also seen, with this crisis brewing up with Israel, which could have destabilized their, the fragile new friendship between Saudi Arabia and Iran, it's actually had the opposite effect. So, that relationship is improving. Iran is being advised and armed and helped by Russia in a way that's might prove as effective as a Russian intervention in Syria, with the difference that Iran is a much stronger power and much better prepared for any potential war breaking out between Iran and Israel and the United States. And so there's a lot of downside risk, and there's hardly anything to gain. Lindsey Graham's delusional fantasies about regime changing Iran are delusional fantasies. They would like to do that, and I'm sure that they spend time in their think tanks discussing this. They would like to regime change China. They would like to regime change Belarus and Russia. They'd like to regime change everybody they don't like. But between what they would like to do and what they can do is a growing gap, and they are on the losing side.
Yeah, it's so amazing that you mentioned we when we look at the color revolutions, and there with this isolation, then going and regime change through these color revolutions, they have failed in Georgia, at least so far. And it seems that as time goes by, these countries, including Russia, Belarus, as you mentioned, Iran, China, they're getting much more familiar with the tricks that the United States can play with them in order to bring some sort of unrest within the society. And do you think that in the mind of those people who are still thinking of color revolution, is that possible to do it even with the Saudi Arabia? Let's put it that way. If the Saudis decide not to get in line totally with them.
Yes, obviously it is possible. Not only in their minds, it is possible, because we've seen that they've just very recently they had a successful regime change, color revolution in Bangladesh. So they're capable of doing it. The only problem is that their playbook is now very well understood by their target nations. And the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has now been developing deliberate defense mechanisms against color revolutions. Because what do they rely on? They rely on extremism, they're relying on separatism, and they're relying on terrorism. So you cultivate organizations like Al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda and ISIS and so forth, and they cultivate them everywhere around the world, in Myanmar, in Bangladesh, in India, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. And then they use separatists. They use groups who want to maybe carve out their own independent nation, and they help them destabilize their host nations. And they use terrorism to destabilize nations. And all of these three tactics have been specifically mentioned in one of the recent SCO documents, in which they discussed security for the whole continent. So we can assume that the security services in nations like Iran, in Saudi Arabia, in Syria, and elsewhere are actively developing mechanisms and tactics and security structures to fight off these regime change endeavors. And we have seen that in many places they have been successful. Cases being Georgia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and a number of other countries. So, to conclude, they could potentially be successful. They have, a great deal of experience and know-how in this domain. But the other side has also been developing their own immune response to this. So it's going to get more and more difficult. And I think that Mohammed bin Salman has been particularly wise to this, and I think that he has taken very, very aggressive steps and decisive steps to make sure that he cannot be easily overthrown.
Yeah. One of the countries that recently has experienced some sort of military coup and regime change was Turkey. And Erdogan right now, with as time goes by with the conflict in the Middle East, he's getting much more serious about what Israelis are doing in Palestine and in Lebanon. And he recently said that Israel is a Zionist terrorist organization and Hamas is fighting for freedom and to defend the honor of the Islamic world. And we know what Hamas is also fighting for Turkey, because we will be the next place that Israel will set its eye on under the Israeli expansion policy. When you look at this vision on the part of Erdogan, and the people are talking, he's not doing all talk, no action, but these walls have crucial meanings when it comes to Israel. Are Israelis understanding what they're doing to themselves in terms of what's going on with all these countries? I would argue even Saudi Arabia totally understand what's going on in the Middle East and how dangerous is that for them. But they don't talk this way as Erdogan does.
Yes, because the king of the prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, doesn't have to worry about elections. Erdogan does, and so part of his rhetoric is directed at the domestic audiences. Which are absolutely fed up and revolted by the actions of the state of Israel. And so he has to speak to that audience, and he has to speak in a very tough language. Then I think that his actions are actually forced on him, because he would rather not do anything. He would rather trade with Israel and make money. But in the end, I think that he has to follow up on his words to some extent, because he's being forced to by political pressures. And then it is true that, Israel, the United States and Britain would very much like to regime change Turkey, and they have tried to do so. Erdogan's skin was rescued by Vladimir Putin when they tried to overthrow him, when they tried to overthrow Erdogan in, what was it, 2016, 2018, I forget exactly.
I think it was that.
Yeah, and so he knows that he is in danger. And then let's not forget, part of these megalomaniacal agendas that are being pursued by the Israeli cabinet also include Eretz Israel, expanding the territory all the way to the western.
It was 2016.
2016. Okay, yeah, correct. So the expanding Israeli territory all the way to the western shore of the Euphrates River. And so in that case, the Israelis and the Americans, they like to cultivate their Kurdish separatists, right? which are always a source of potential destabilization of Turkey. So, Erdogan must know that this is a ticking time bomb there, and that, eventually it'll be his turn. So, Erdogan is facing a much more complicated set of considerations than Mohammed bin Salman is. At least that's how I read it.
Yeah. And the other thing, Alex, right now in the United States, we have two candidates, Republican and Democrat. And Donald Trump has a good chance of winning the 2024 presidential election in the United States. And recently he was talking about de-dollarization and what he would do in terms of fighting this concept. Here is what he said, Alex.
Yeah. And it's had moments of greatness, but I think it's a declining. It's so sad what's happened. We're a nation in decline, and we can't let it be declined. I'll give you an example. We're going to lose our monetary base very soon because, countries are going off the dollar. I'm going to get them back on the dollar. I'm going to say, you got to go back on you're not going to do any business with, you got to do it. But I do think this, where I really agree with you, we have tremendous potential.
Yeah.
And I say it, make America great again.
Yeah. How, in your opinion, how we can reverse the situation that is totally against dollar right now?
I don't think he can reverse it. But, if you strip out the election rhetoric, he's not altogether wrong. And I think that he could slow down the decline. He could slow down the de-dollarization. He can make the dollar more relevant in global trade again. I think that, there's a dollar is still the world's predominant trade currency. It's still the world's predominant reserve currency. It's on decline, but it's not, it's not over. It's not game over yet for the US dollar. And I think that part of it, there's a psychological inertia because everybody in the world still knows what it means if a barrel of oil costs $80, if an ounce of gold costs $2,600. It will be very difficult for people to start now thinking like, oh, it's so many units, it's so many special drawing rights per barrel of oil, or things like this. So just that inertia has a certain let's call it favorable wind for Donald Trump in trying to keep the dollar as a dominant reserve and trading currency around the world. So yeah, he's not wrong about that, and he can do by engaging with countries diplomatically, by trading, by giving them favorable terms of financing, favorable terms of trade, and so on. It's not going to be possible anymore, I think, by imposing terms and saying like, well, if you don't do what we said, then we're going to sanction you. They've already sanctioned something like 2/3 of the whole world's GDP. Ultimately, they end up sanctioning themselves. They're losing that trade as well. And so these psychological elements aren't completely irrelevant. But every reserve currency has had its day, and then it's declined. And then that decline has been always something with an unstoppable inertia, right? The world is moving on. But that doesn't mean that dollar is going to go to zero. Look at the British pound. The British pound used to be the world's predominant trade currency and reserve currency. And then it was replaced by the US dollar, but the pound is still there. The British pound is still there. It still has some purchasing power, some value. And so I think that this process of de-dollarization, while it might accelerate with the Belt and Road Initiative, with the BRICS, with the new trade currency that apparently they are, we're going to learn later this month more about this. It might accelerate it, but it's not going to go to nothing overnight. And I think that a Trump administration, if we are fortunate to see it ascend to the White House in January, I think that they might have some maneuvering space to improve their position in that respect.
Is Trump capable, if he wins, is he capable of putting an end to the conflict in Ukraine? Or the deep state would say, it doesn't matter what you want. Here is the plan. You have to just follow the plan that, as we've been following during this more than 2 years of the conflict in Ukraine. He can reduce sending the arms. He can put some sort of pressure on Zelensky. But I'm talking about the big picture, the way that the United States sees Russia, the way that the United States put policies against Russia. Is that going to change?
Yes, I think it will. First of all, Ukraine is finished. They're still kicking, but they're finished. Ukraine defaulted on the 1st of August of this year. They're no longer capable of servicing their external debt. They literally depend on handouts from the allied nations like Britain, European Union, and the United States. If that financial flow is cut off, they're finished. They will not be able to even pay soldiers' salaries and pensions. Not to forget, something like between 70 and 80% of their energy infrastructure is finished. Europe is facing probably a new large wave of refugees from Ukraine to Poland and Germany and elsewhere in Western Europe. It's going, and they're already at capacity. Trump could take advantage of this situation politically to impose himself as some kind of a peacemaker and take credit for everything that's about to follow, with or without him. But then he will be able to say, like, oh, well, look, like, I ended this terrible conflict, and I improved our relationship with Russia. And let's not forget, part of the reason why he will be doing this is not just to make peace in Europe. Part of the reason is because he wants to focus his attention on China. And I think there's a large segment of the American national security establishment that is very keen on, cutting off Ukraine and focusing their attention on China. And I think that as a politician, as an opportunist, I can see him choosing to ride that wave, and then trying to even pull Russia back into the Western orbit in order to undermine China and weaken her alliance with Russia.
Is that in your opinion, that would be the case? Is that possible to separate China or weaken the relationship ties between Russia and China, or even, because we know that if Trump wins, he has very different mindset on China and Iran. These are two partners of Russia, and militarily, geopolitically, and how do you see the way that the Trump administration would behave in order to separate Russia from these two countries?
Well, trade deals, removal of sanctions, starting back negotiations about intermediate and short-range missiles, possible dismantling of the missile sites in Poland and Romania. All of these are good negotiating cards for Trump to use with Russia. Now, I don't think that the Russians will allow themselves to lose their alliance with China and to go behind the backs of the Chinese leaders and start to simply cooperate with the West as though nothing had happened between 2014 and today. But you never know. Vladimir Putin will not live forever. We don't know who's going to replace him. We don't know what the thinking might be in the near future. And so I think that anything is possible. At this time, it's unlikely, but no, 5 years, 10 years down the road, who knows? And the West, obviously, for as long as they are angling for hegemony over the Eurasian landmass, they don't have very many partners to talk to, and Russia is the main one. So okay, India would also be important there, but I think that Russia is the main one, and I think that they will try to correct the terrible, terrible blunder, strategic blunder, in allowing Russia and China to forge this alliance. This is actually, if you go back to the writings of Halford Mackinder and later Zbigniew Brzezinski, they actually explicitly mentioned this prospect of China, Russia, and Iran forming an alliance, that would be a catastrophic development for the Western hegemony over the Eurasian landmass. And this is exactly what they made happen. So I think it's very, very probable that they will make efforts to undo these alliances in whatever way they can. One of them we talked about, possibly regime changing Iran. They can freely fantasize about that prospect. But another one would be to get Russia back into the Western orbit somehow. And I think that Trump would be the man who could actually make something in this direction happen. And actually, if you listen to J.D. Vance's interviews and his speeches, he's pretty much on this very same wavelength. He's saying Ukraine was a big mistake. We shouldn't have done this. We need to get out. We need to end that war. But hey, China, there we need to focus our attention. And somehow J.D. Vance became his vice presidential nominee. So maybe that's the reason. That's part of the reason.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Alex, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thank you, Nima. Always a pleasure.
Bye.